So, of course, the Democrats are up to their usual games of trying to shift blame for various incompetencies of the Democrats, while trying to also use it as an attack on the GOP and claim voter suppression. So, I'm going to talk about what happened in Wisconsin for just a moment, and then I'm going to go through and explain what they're really after and trying to develop here. And so, let's go ahead and take a look at the narrative.
Why didn't the state Supreme Court allow the governor's request to delay the election to go forward? And do voters there feel like politics were at play in that decision?
You know, a lot of voters I talked to, and I was at a Washington High School in Sherman Park in Milwaukee's Central City yesterday, a lot of African-American voters who felt like Republicans were trying to keep them away from the polls.
Okay, so here is the narrative, the two narratives that they're setting up in that particular video. One, this was about voter suppression. Yes, that's right. See, because of the pandemic, people would be afraid to go and cast their votes in the Democrat primary where there's not a Republican on the ballot to really care about how the vote turned out. But okay, but they're trying to suppress the vote by forcing people to vote in person during a pandemic. And also, what the Republicans wanted was for as many Democrats to be exposed to the coronavirus so that they die before the November election and therefore can't cast the vote. This narrative is complete BS, right? Because the Republicans did not play a part in any way of forcing people to have to go and vote in person. Now, they want to go off and say, but the U.S. Supreme Court didn't rule on in-person voting. That wasn't even part of the Supreme Court's ruling. So let's go ahead and take a look at what really happened. So as the Wall Street Journal is reporting, Wisconsin planned to mitigate the coronavirus threat with a large increase in vote by mail so fewer people would need to leave their homes. Seems reasonable and understandable. But then the Democrat National Committee sued to force the delay of the election outright. And this lawsuit delayed sending out the vote by mail. So the Democrats wanted to send out more vote by mail to safeguard for the public. And then Democrat infighting and a lawsuit from one Democrat against another Democrat started mucking up the works. So then last Thursday, a federal judge denied that extreme request, the extreme request being delaying the election outright, but said vote by mail needed to be extended. Instead of receiving ballots by April 7th, he said clerks needed to count any ballots received by next Monday, April 13th. After apparently realizing that this could distort the electoral process by allowing Tuesday's reported results to influence votes, the judge issued another order banning the state election board from reporting any results before April 13th. Now, this is where the problem came into play, and the Republicans needed to step in. And the Republican National Committee asked the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene, and 5 justices agreed that the district judge was outside of his authority, with the two problems being that his remedy would fundamentally alter the nature of elections by allowing voting for 6 additional days after the election. So first off, the Supreme Court never ruled about whether or not they could delay the election, never ruled that they had to vote in person, but saying, hey, as long as this is your declared election day, then all votes have to be received on that day or before. But once that day passes, you can't count any more votes, right? That's all. That's it. But it also went off and pointed out that, hey, this banning of reporting the results, you're trying to enjoin or muzzle the election results, enjoining, in essence, non-parties to this lawsuit. So you're making people who are not even part of this lawsuit bound to the results of the lawsuit. And that's the second problem. So all the Supreme Court decided on was, one, you cannot enjoin non-parties to the lawsuit to the outcome of the lawsuit. And you cannot keep counting votes once election day is over. That's it. Whether or not they vote in person or vote by mail was left to the states, to decide. Right? Now, the Supreme Court decision came hours after Wisconsin court swatted aside Governor Terry Evers' effort to unilaterally postpone the election through March. Mr. Evers, a Democrat, had indicated the election should proceed and issued an executive order exempting polling places from his mass gathering ban. So, after the Supreme Court had gone through and decided, hey, you know what? You can postpone the election. You can do it by mail, or you can do it in person. That's up to you. You just can't keep voting after Election Day, and you can't bind up people not a part of the lawsuit to the lawsuit. And so the governor decides that he's going to go ahead and continue with the election as planned, and then allow an exemption to his gathering ban. So the Republicans weren't the ones forcing people to go out and vote. This was all Democrats. But of course, they need a narrative. And they need a narrative that they can go out and blame the Republicans for the Democrats putting people in danger by their own infighting. Now, as we go through and we take a look at this, it's also that they could promote yet another narrative. So let's go ahead and take a look at the language that they're using and what they really mean.
This administration didn't plan for this pandemic when they could have. They didn't plan. They didn't get the testing underway. And now we are not going to let them take this democracy away from us. Working with Republican and Democratic Secretary of States across the country to make sure that we extend vote at home, vote by mail to every American, and also make sure that these polls are open early, 20 days early in November.
James, last question. I got 45 seconds for you to answer it. You said a while back, if Biden does nothing, he wins. Is that still true?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to do something, obviously. That's a little poetic license. But I think he's in a commanding position. But we got to be careful about is it mucking around with his voting. And they're going to try it because Trump, everybody, all the Republicans admitted we can't win if everybody votes.
Okay, so there's a couple of narratives in there, and maybe you missed it because it's subtle. Now, they said that they want to go through and, have voting election open for 20 days. 20 days. And you know why they want that? So that they can try and do post interviews and try and see which way the votes are swinging. That way, if the votes are swinging towards Donald Trump, they can encourage more Democrats that would generally, I guess, sit the election out to get out and vote. And they would know probably who did and didn't vote so that they can go after the people who didn't vote and drag them to the polls because Donald Trump may be winning. Or they can try and report information in order to influence the voter turnout. So that is one. But you know what? We're not really concerned with a lot of people voting. We like people voting, right? We want everybody to vote. Well, every American citizen, that is. And that is another issue here when they're going off and they're talking about voter suppression or expanding the voting block or if everyone votes. But who are they actually thinking about when they say expanding the voting block? Because right now the voting block is every American citizen, right? Every American citizen is eligible to vote. And so the only way to extend that and have everyone vote is to extend voting rights to non-citizens and to extend that even to illegal immigrants. And when they go off and say that Republicans admit if everybody votes, they would not win. Well, you're right. If everybody in the world votes in the U.S. election, we wouldn't win because the Democrats would be out there selling us out to every other country. And so we take a look here, about expanding the voting block. As the Los Angeles Times had reported back in 2018, San Francisco will allow non-citizens to vote in local elections, creating a new immigration flashpoint. San Francisco in November will become the largest city in the nation to allow non-citizens, otherwise also known as illegal immigrants in a lot of cases, but not all non-citizens are illegal immigrants, but allow them a chance to vote in local elections, making the city once again a flashpoint in the debate about immigration. And this is what they mean by expanding the vote and what they mean by voter suppression. So let's take a look at what they are defining voter suppression. The Republicans' view of one person, one vote, the Democrats view it as voter suppression. Because if you remember the Project Veritas video back in 2016, they caught the New York election commissioner on camera admitting that Democrats bus people around from voting location to voting location to vote multiple times. And so if you try to enact voter ID laws to verify that the person voting is who they say they are, you're suppressing the vote because that person may have voted multiple times. But now that you're limiting them to one vote, you're suppressing the vote. And how the scam works for the Democrats is that they get organizations to go out and get information on voter rolls. You know, who is registered to vote, where they're located, and whether or not they voted in recent elections. And then based off of that information, they can determine with a high degree of accuracy who is likely to actually vote. And then they'll bus people around to assume the identity of people who don't generally vote but are registered to vote. And because you're not allowed to check their ID, there is no verification that the person voting is who they say they are. And so they bus around to different locations. But trying to limit the voting to one person, one vote, the Democrats want to call that voter suppression. Now, what the Democrats are also considering voter suppression is not allowing illegal immigrants to vote. We can debate about, permanent legal residents and, whether or not they should be allowed to vote or have a voice or, are making it, easier for them to become citizens so that they can vote. Some of them are only permanent residents as they are waiting to qualify for citizenship, for some waiting periods and all that. And we can go through and have that debate, but that, liberal activist judges would go off and declare a lot of people permanent residents, even illegal immigrants. I mean, why not? They've already made it so that we can't enforce immigration laws, as they are written throughout the country in order to try and protect illegal immigrants. But if we were to take expanding the voter bloc to where the Democrats want to take him to illegal immigrants, here's why Republicans wouldn't get elected. Because every election year, countries could send their citizens over our border because the Democrats, they don't want border enforcement. They want open borders. So every election year, people would be able to come flooding across the border from countries all around the world, register to vote, and cast a vote. Now, what would that do to American democracy? What would that do to our representation in government? The Democrats, they don't care because the Democrats don't want the people to select the representatives. They want to reverse it so that the representatives select the voters, which is the complete opposite of democracy, by the way. And that's where the Democrats are trying to go with this. They're trying to claim that it's voter suppression to say that only U.S. citizens should be able to vote and that each person should only be able to cast one vote. That's the manipulation of language that they are going through in order to convince us that we need to open voting up to basically the rest of the world. Because they know that they can go out and pander to Russia, pander to China, pander to all the countries south of the border and say, hey, if you just send enough of your citizens over our unsecured borders, we'll let them vote. And by letting them vote, it means that we will have such a majority that we can then send taxpayer dollars to benefit you. We can make American workers basically enslaved to your country, to benefiting your country, rather than having them work for the people of the United States. That is sick. What the Democrats are doing and the narratives they are pushing to accomplish it is un-American.